I'm Rena van Tolbert for Biz News. The South African government is under pressure in the wake of the International Criminal Court warrant of arrest for Russian President Vladimir Putin on suspicion of war crimes in Ukraine as it prepares to host a BRICS meeting that Putin is scheduled to attend. So, what is South Africa going to do with its big Putin headache? Will they dare to arrest the Russian leader? Well, we have foreign policy analyst Peter Fabricius in the studio to discuss the Putin dilemma. Hi, Peter. Lovely to have you back.
Hi, Linda. Yeah, good to be here. Thank you.
Well, President Ramaphosa is sending an envoy to the United States to explain the country's position. Are these steps that South Africa is taking to shield it from sanctions? What is President Ramaphosa actually asking of the Americans?
Yeah, they haven't been explicit about that yet. I don't think they've even confirmed that trip, but what it probably amounts to more than anything else is the concern, I think, is that we could lose our AGOA benefits. The AGOA, the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, as most people know, is a piece of legislation been around since the year 2000, which gives, qualified African countries privileged access to the U.S. market, which has been quite helpful for South Africa. Last year it increased its export to the U.S. under AGOA from 2 to 3 billion US, and there's rumblings in the U.S. Congress about South Africa benefiting from this. What is a unilateral measure, really, a non-reciprocal privileged access to the U.S. market, and yet still opposing U.S. positions on Ukraine and so on. And so that's complicating relations, and South Africa is, I think, getting concerned that might be something it could lose.
When I looked at AGOA, and it seems that South Africa is actually from Sub-Saharan countries the main beneficiary.
Yeah,
like 56% of those imports. For us exports. So that could actually be in jeopardy, and it would affect. It seems to affect the automotive industry more than anything else.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm not sure of the stats of what percentage South Africa represents. I know if you included oil, like Nigeria was up there as well, but without it, certainly. And one of the things about it has been that it has promoted manufactured goods to some degree, or at least value-added goods. So if you look at the relationship, the trade relationship that South Africa has with the US, it has a greater proportion of value-added manufactured exports in it than much more, for example, than South Africa's trade with China, which is bigger in total volume. But and also, I mean, last year, I'm just having a look at these stats here. Last year, we had a trade surplus with the US of some nearly $10 billion US, which is a chunk, actually. You convert that to rand, particularly. And so it's quite, as you said, automobiles have been quite a big part of it. Like mostly South Africa doesn't produce its own auto, but it assembles German cars, for example, BMWs and Mercedes-Benzes and so on, and they export. So those create jobs and they create foreign exchange. So it's been useful.
So it's also a crucial time because I see AGOA actually expires in 2025. So it's likely to be continued, but they always come up with new terms and tweak it a bit. So South Africa might be in danger there.
That's right. I mean, look, I'm not sure that it's necessarily going to be renewed. For the last few times when it's come up for renewal, there's been some debate about, especially from the US side, obviously not the African side, about do we need a normal reciprocal trade deal? Because what the Americans do, they look at what in South Africa's case, for example, we have the economic partnership agreement with the EU. I mean, South Africa and some of its neighbors, and that's reciprocal. So the EU also gets privileged access to the Southern African market. And what the Americans say, they don't mind so much giving, African countries, or South Africa in particular, access to their market with no tariffs, etc., no quotas. But they object to competing with the EU on unfavorable terms in the Southern African market. So there's this pressure to equalize. And in South Africa in particular, and it's not only therefore in South Africa's case that they're irritated with our position on Russia, that aggravates things. It's just the first feeling that South Africa is a special country because it's got this manufacturing capacity. No other African country has that kind of trade pattern with the US, with quite a heavy, not predominance, but quite a heavy weighting of manufactured goods, value-added goods.
So what do you think would be the position if first of all, they say South Africa is not part of AGOA, or if it expires, will we have to renegotiate a trade deal like we have with the EU?
Yeah. You see, if it expires without that, then we lose quite a lot because we just fall then into the most favored nation. They call it status, which is a little bit misleading in a way, which is just like everybody else kind of thing. So we wouldn't have any special access. And the other option, but time is running out for that, is that we, and this has been on the cards for a long time, that we should negotiate a reciprocal trade deal. I mean, we tried to do that years and years ago, and it just didn't work. And I mean, I think probably both sides were kind of were rather obstinate and non-negotiable on several issues. But still, that would be the real alternative. In other words, something similar to, as you say, to what the EU has.
Yeah, so it might be tough times for South Africa if we're not in AGOA anymore.
Yeah, look, it's not it's not everything. I mean, what is if you look at the total trade with the US last year, it was about 9 billion, 10 billion US, of which 3 were through AGOA, but that's not insubstantial, considering especially that you're talking about an economy where times are hard anyway, where poverty is high, where unemployment is high, where inequality is high. So yeah, it would be. I mean, South Africa by no means underestimates the importance of retaining AGOA, which is why I think that the special envoys are going to be sent. What they will say, they'll obviously go to. The danger comes in Congress more than anywhere else. You may have seen that a couple of months ago, the House of Representatives, which is now controlled by the Republicans, since the elections in December, they tabled a resolution which basically expressed their displeasure about South Africa's position on Russia. They were talking about the military drills we had with China and Russia, all the things that have been complained about here. I mean, the fact that we had those drills, and yet we cancelled the drill with the US last year, and so on and so forth, and with China, and they came up with quite a lot of stuff that is still speculative. They said, for example, there were reports that China operates unofficial police stations in South Africa to monitor its dissidents. That's never been confirmed, and nobody knows for sure whether it's true. It's denied by the South African and Chinese government. Anyway, but the crunch of that resolution is that it calls upon the U.S. administration to actually review the relations with South Africa, including the AGOA benefits, and the implication being, if it doesn't like what it comes up with, that we should reconsider those relations, including AGOA. Now, look, that resolution hasn't passed. It may not pass. It was tabled at the time that Lindsey Graham and Chris Coons, the two senators, were here, one a Republican, one a Democrat, and they both basically said that they didn't think it would pass. But even if it doesn't pass, and if, for example, it doesn't get to the Senate, it reflects, as quite a few people have said, the kind of growing sentiment of Congress. So it's something South Africa does have to take cognizance of.
Yes. So what would Ramaphosa ask for apart from the AGOA agreement? Would they say, okay, but you guys aren't part of the ICC. How
Yeah.
can you tell us, go and arrest Putin?
Yeah. You see, it's not quite clear how directly related that trip is to Putin's supposed arrival here. It may have been a coincidence of timing that just as that issue blew up, that it also emerged that they were sending these envoys. And yeah, you're right. I mean, it's probably not a point that the US would make, that South Africa would make in the US very strongly, because they might feel that they're in a defensive position and they shouldn't be too chirpy about it. But yeah, that is a point. And it's not so much though. I guess it's not just the membership or otherwise of the ICC, but it's just what Putin has been doing in Ukraine that's really the issue. And I think you see what I was told is that the Americans might be worried about the optics, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. That the BRICS summit's supposed to happen like 22nd to 24th of August this year, and then in September at least there was an AGOA forum summit. I'm not sure what you call it. It's probably ministerial. That was due to take place in South Africa. The AGOA, there's a meeting that alternates between the US and an African country. And what has been concerning the US is that if Putin comes here, an indicted ICC, wanted fugitive, plus everything that's been happening in Ukraine and South Africa refusing to condemn Russia, and then a few weeks later you expect all these US senators and congressmen to arrive in this country. A lot of them just going to cancel, and there's a whole big thing going on about whether or not that they want to move it or to another country or a different date or whatever. So it would be to some degree, the optics that might be a problem more than the substance.
There's an interesting article in The Economist this week that they actually think that non-aligned countries have a bit more power now because of the shifting global power politics. And which makes me wonder, could Mr. Ramaphosa not be only trying to avoid the stick from the US, but also maybe looking for a carrot? Maybe, what is the price of shifting closer to the US?
Yeah, that's a good point, because throughout the this whole controversy over Ukraine, the South African government, I know, has taken the view that if you look at the evidence, it seems like the West wants us more than we want them. That doesn't sound all that kind of logical to some degree, but if you look at it, I mean, last year after Russia invaded Ukraine, and South Africa, voted to abstain from the first couple of resolutions at the UN General Assembly. Germany still invited South Africa to President Ramaphosa to the G7. I understand he's being invited again, actually, next month to the G7 in Japan. He became Britain's first, King Charles's first state visitor to the UK, and there were other instances too of visits and so on. And then the impression that was created, and some ambassadors, Western ambassadors, said that the concern here was that South Africa might drift further into the Russia, China, etc. camp. So that is a bargaining chip. Now, you have to play that quite carefully, because, I mean, the way I'm hearing it from the Western diplomats, they felt that at the beginning, towards more lately, they're starting to become a little bit more concerned, because they did this joint naval exercise. The fact that the ANC sent a delegation to Moscow to meet its Russian counterpart, the United Russia Party, and so on. All these things are making them think that South Africa is going that way anyway. So, does it help much to avoid alienating South Africa? So I don't know about whether South Africa or whether Ramaphosa or whoever he sends, I've heard it might be the deputy foreign ministers, would really be playing such a hard, hand, such a strong hand. Actually.
So that might not be a bargaining chip.
Yeah, I don't know. You're right. I know the article you're talking about, and that is a concern. And the BRICS summit, as we were talking about in August, is going to be one of the things that's going to be on the agenda is the application by new countries to join.
Yeah.
And so there is a concern growing, I think, in the West that BRICS might be developing into quite a formidable kind of counterweight to the West, I mean, it's proposing to, there's a proposal on the table, barely discussed yet, to form its own currency to sort of counterweight the US dollar. There are members like last year they were already applying, and there are others applying. There's Iran, Saudi Arabia, some countries quite hostile to and Venezuela, and so quite hostile to Western interests. So this bloc, I noticed in that Economist article, they said it's very unlikely that all these non-aligned countries could form a bloc. And that is probably true, but something might be moving in that direction.
Interesting. Well, when we talk about Putin, everybody sort of assumes he's coming, but that is not as certain, is it?
No, it's not. It's not certain for a number of reasons. I mean, I wonder actually even if Putin hasn't really traveled much since this war began.
He apparently doesn't even travel in Russia, let alone come to South Africa.
Yeah. So he might not feel good about that. He may, and then South Africa's own position, as you know, is that he's officially invited to the BRICS summit, as would have to be the case because he's one of the 5 leaders of BRICS. But the JOCO, the Department of International Relations, has formulated a legal opinion, which is not public, about what it should do, and it's pretty common knowledge that the legal opinion is that it would have to arrest him if he comes. But the question is, what weight would that opinion have in the whole cabinet, where there's some pretty hardline members, like the defense minister and so on, who probably not that wouldn't be that supportive. In fact, this last Wednesday, I think there was supposed to be a cabinet meeting where we were expecting that there might be some announcement about their position on that legal opinion. And so there are other legal options to try and wiggle out of it, amending our own legislation, which domesticates the Rome Statute of the ICC, trying to persuade the ICC that things are different now from the way they were, when there was this rather infamous case in 2015 that we didn't arrest the Sudanese president. Yeah. And that got us into a lot of trouble with our own courts, got the government in trouble with its own domestic courts as well as the ICC. And they don't really want to be condemned by their own courts again, So what happens with Putin is still very much up in the air, but I suspect that he probably won't come. Maybe there's some talk they may do it online. It could even be that they have it in Russia, because maybe it would be a second best prize for Putin to be able to, welcome all these African leaders. These BRICS leaders, because funny enough, my sort of theory, completely untested by reality, is that he's supposed to be having a Africa summit, Russia-Africa summit in St. Petersburg in July, and I think probably the end of July. I wondered if he might not just decide to tag on, the
whole thing,
at the end of it, and then he can be basking in all this attention from Africa, from BRICS, whatever, which might not be a bad idea. It might tend to obscure the reality that he just can't come to South Africa.
Well, definitely space to watch with South Africa sort of in the middle of this global pulling of, the powers and this shifting sands, it seems to be, of global superpowers.
I would say, by the way, just in case, because you said, it's to me completely unthinkable that they would ever arrest Putin. It would be absolutely disastrous. So if they take the view that they cannot avoid arresting him if he comes, and they'll make sure he doesn't come. You know what I mean?
That's what
and I can't see Putin just popping in. I have a funny feeling that that's what happened with Bashir. Actually, my theory about Bashir. You remember that on 2 previous occasions, in 2009 and 2010, he was also officially invited for the inauguration of President Zuma, and the second time for the opening of the World Cup.
Yeah.
And so he was officially invited, along with all the others, and they just quietly had to tell him, sorry, you can't come, because we'd have to arrest you. But in 2015, it was the AU summit, and Robert Mugabe was chairing the AU summit. And I'm absolutely certain that Robert Mugabe said, you will be at that summit this year. No way you're going to allow those neo-colonial, neo-imperialist Westerners to prevent you from doing AU business. So South Africa, I think, was just presented with this fait accompli. Anyway.
Not a position that South Africa wants to be in.
No.
Foreign Policy Analyst Peter Fabricius, thanks so much. It's very interesting. Thanks for speaking to us.